Let's go back now into the courtroom. We are picking it up with closing arguments from the defense.
May it please the court, counsel, Luke, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I want to start, folks, by thanking you for your time, for your attention. It has been a long couple of weeks for us, but also, as I can tell, for you guys. You guys have seen some horrendous images. You've heard some horrible theories of what happened. And through it all, you've given us your attention, you've taken notes, and trust me when I tell you, somebody who's done a lot of trials, it's not something we get very often. And so I thank you. Mass murder in Marion. Bludgeoned, left bleeding and dying on a concrete floor. That's what the state started their closing argument with. That's true. Well, they left out the part while all this was happening, while Larry was taking a cigarette break. 4 people, either dead or dying. Larry's out front, walking back and forth, smoking a cigarette. He's not rendering aid, like it's been alluded to. He's out there, relaxed, pacing back and forth, puffing on a cig. And the state says that Luke was in a daze, and Larry was doing damage control. Or Luke was dumbfounded by what he had just seen, 4 dead bodies. Absolutely in shock by having seen 4 bodies. Larry was trying to minimize what had just happened based on his own actions. And we don't know which is true. Can I have the screen, Your Honor? Folks, we said in our opening argument that all we wanted you to do as members of the jury was to hold the state to their burden. It is the state's obligation to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. And you will get a definition of what a reasonable doubt is, but we are reiterating that that is all we are asking for you to do today. Don't jump to the same conclusions that they jumped to. Don't make the assumptions that Egley made unless you yourself believe those. Think for yourself. Don't get caught up in the pageantry and the emotion of what happens. Don't think to yourself, there are 4 dead bodies. Somebody has to be held accountable. The person who's sitting right here, Luke Truesdell, is sitting there. He must be held accountable. No. Hold him accountable if the state has done their job. If the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, then you hold them accountable. But if they don't, either through a lack of evidence or the police not doing a sufficient job, and you have holes in your thought process, that is reasonable doubt. There are 5 questions that we hammered on during our cross-examination. I'm sure all of you picked up on what our point was. The first one was it really a confession? Oh, excuse me, I'm going to back up for a second. The way the state gets past their burden is by using tunnel vision and confirmation bias. We'll talk about that quite a bit. But as you're listening to the statements made by Luke in his interviews, Lieutenant Egley hears what he wants to hear. Luke makes a lot of statements. He says a lot of things. A lot of it doesn't make sense. And intertwined in there, interspersed in there, are random comments that Lieutenant Egley just jumps on. and holds them as fact, holds them as absolute truth. The images that you see on the surveillance footage, those two shadows, you can't see who they are. And we'll show you a slide here in a couple minutes, but you can see on the overhead view that there is a whole section of the yard that is not at all covered by surveillance footage. You cannot tell who's there. You cannot tell where Luke is. You cannot tell where Larry is. You cannot tell when Larry got to the boat.
Defense counsel just getting into his closing argument. We're going to squeeze in a quick break. We'll have more of his arguments when we come back.
Mama tried. Now my daddy's crying because I'm in here.
You are the common denominator that led to JD and Big Doug shooting each other in the dark of night.
I ain't help right now, I'm dying.
Don't you have the blood of both these men on your hands?
I feel guilty for that.
You felt guilty because, frankly, you were guilty.
Interview with a Killer. New episode Saturday night at 8 Eastern and Pacific. Only on Court TV.
Back now to Iowa, where we have been watching closing arguments in the murder trial for Luke Truesdell. He is charged with the beating deaths of 4 people in Lynn County last year. The prosecution says that Truesdell ambushed the victims, killing them with a metal pipe. He does face life in prison without parole if a jury ends up convicting him in this case. So let's go back into the courtroom now. We're going to listen to some more closing arguments from defense counsel.
Before we get to diving into that, though, we're going to talk about whether it was really a confession. Now, you'll get this jury instruction, but the jury instruction requires you to evaluate the defendant's mental or emotional state at the time it was made and any other evidence related to the confession. I am begging you, when you go back to deliberate, listen to the state's exhibits 6.1 and 6.2. Those are the 2 exhibits that have Luke's statements on there. I was listening to them again last night, and I have over a page worth of statements that are taken out of context. They were utilized like a sword in this trial. And please listen to them. I'm going to read to you some of them as an example. When Luke was originally asked what happened, his response was, "I don't know." He tells Sergeant Payne, "I opened the center door, saw a body, and walked right out." Sergeant Payne asked him, "Did you go in?" Luke shakes his head, no. He shakes his head, no. I never went inside. And then Sergeant Payne tells him, "So you went inside." A man who is high on methamphetamines and has just seen 4 dead bodies tries to tell him what he knows. I shake his head, no, and then is convinced, "Yeah, you did. You went inside." And Luke just goes along with it. And it continues. He gets asked, "Did they do something to you?" "I don't know. I really don't know." Luke says they were arguing and stuff. One was laying there. Brent was still kind of breathing. So in the first confession alone, and I'm sorry, I'm putting confession in quotes here because you guys determine if that's a true confession. The state has labeled it as one, but you guys get to determine if that's actually confession. But in the first set of statements alone, Luke denies being in the building at all. He says, I saw bodies and I walked right out. Then he gets told that he went in, and he just goes with it. And then when he says that he was in there, he doesn't admit to having done anything. He describes a crime scene. Folks, this is not me trying to convince you that this is what happened. This is actually on the audio. This is actually part of Luke's statements. In the second interview, and this is brought up by Lieutenant Egley, Luke says, quoting him, and the state wants you to believe that that is because he has just released this pressure of having just committed 4 murders. That is how he feels. He has this pressure lifted off of his shoulders. But if you listen to the audio directly prior to that, Luke is talking about his grandma. He's talking about how he's opening up to childhood trauma that he's never talked about to anybody, or at a minimum in years. He's vocalizing some of the awful, awful things that he has seen and been through in his life. He is not saying that he feels better admitting to having killed 4 people. And the problem with that is Lieutenant Egley clearly knows. He said it on the stand. And you folks will have the DCI results. Lieutenant Egley knows that Luke is high on methamphetamine. He knows that at a minimum, he just saw 4 dead bodies, and yet he chose that time, that instance, to push him for real information. Didn't wait for him to sober up so he could be a little more clear-headed. He chose that time. I just want you to listen to those statements, guys. That's it. Okay? If you hear them the same way that the state hears them, well, I can't argue that. But if you hear them for what they are, if you hear them the way that we hear them, you will understand that these are not confessions. These are statements made by somebody who is clearly traumatized, not only from what he had just seen, but also from the life he's been forced to live, and is high on methamphetamine. And you'll hear that they are not confessions. Second big problem. Does Luke actually go into the shed? From a physical standpoint, from a very obvious standpoint, I don't know. You guys don't either. You can't see it. Now, the state argues that, gosh, we found DNA on that pipe. There was a spot of blood on Luke's shirt from Ramondus Cooper. He had to have been in there. Well, there's some problems with that. We're going to talk about it. Lieutenant Egley acknowledges that you cannot see everything going on behind those vehicles in the yard. You can't. None of us have X-ray vision. We're not Superman up in here. You cannot possibly tell what's actually happening behind 3 large vehicles. So it is entirely possible that somebody's walking around back there and you just can't tell. Similarly, there's a line of trees. Again, we'll pull up this image here in just a second, but there's a line of trees. And Lieutenant Egley admitted it is entirely possible that somebody is walking along that line of trees and you can't see them. So the state wants you to believe that because Larry started at the boat, well then gosh, he had to have stayed at the boat. Can't prove that. That's an assumption. That is speculation. The state wants you to believe that since Luke walked towards the shed, he had to have entered the shed. Can't see it.
Still with us, former prosecutor and constitutional attorney Chris Ann Hall. Chris Ann, okay, so he's saying it wasn't really a confession. He asked, was it really a confession? What do you think of that argument?
I think this defense attorney is doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. He's picking apart
every piece. Remember, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, and a good defense attorney will insert reasonable doubt in every single place of importance against every single important piece of evidence that the state has pushed forward. I think my favorite saying from the defense's closing argument so far is when he said, don't jump, you don't have to jump to the conclusions that the state has jumped to. He's already planted into the jury's mind, hey, wait a minute, are these conclusions actually connected to the evidence, or is the state reaching for a conclusion through the evidence? And by attacking the confession itself, he can actually attack the guilt itself.
Yeah, I mean, he's making some solid arguments there, saying there are a lot of problems with the state's case. Saying problem number one, problem number two. We'll keep listening to it, Chris Ann. Appreciate your excellent insight as always.